Perhaps some editing required.
That's fine, we'll have someone go through before we go public, and I'm happy to do quick and dirty. Wouldn't be a collaborations workshop without it.
Absolutely. I'm going to dig my feet. So it's probably going to be a small workshop, I guess, the amount of us we have, so it might be worth putting tables together at some point. But I'll go through the kind of presentation section. So the SAMHE project kind of came about after COVID, and we'd sort of sent out CO2 monitors across the country, but they weren't smart. They weren't sending the data anywhere. All that kind of effort was lost after COVID, and people stopped looking at them. So SAMHE kind of came about in a sense of how do we get those air quality meters out there and actually collect the data and use it. So that kind of then brought up the issue of, well, you've got that air quality data, but you don't actually have any contextual information. It's very difficult to then decide whether that data is being affected by things like open windows, or actually how many people are in the classroom, or what are they doing. So we wanted to try and find out how you collect that particular information. And that's where citizen science comes in. So we needed to basically engage schools in interacting with their monitor. We had two challenges. One was to try and to kind of collect that contextual data, and the other was to try and disseminate the knowledge and methods by which they could impact their air quality data. So the solution for us, and when I first came into the project, was essentially to have a web application. And that application became a communication device between the schools and the researchers. And that, what was quite important about the project is it was equally important that information was going from the schools to the researchers, like a kind of classic citizen science project, but also that information was going from the researchers to the schools and teaching them about air quality and empowering them to change it. So because it was because we kind of stuck this app in the middle, that meant that we had the two key stakeholders of the schools and the researchers, but then as software developers, we became a stakeholder as well. And what I kind of started in the three-body problem is we had this constant tension between whose problem was most important. Throughout the project, that really drove decision-making, and trying to solve that kind of complexity is what I'm going to try and talk about a little bit today. And I will just kind of cover that we didn't just have air quality researchers, we also had behavioural scientists, we have citizen science scientists as well. And in the dev team, we had us as RSEs, but also a project manager, and we covered schools from primary up to secondary in the full age range. So this is the SAMHE monitor, and I've got an example here. I don't know, is that coming up on the owl? It doesn't pick up it up as a person. It should just look like a face on it. To pick it up. So we've sent the monitor to over 1,000 schools so far, which is on the surface a success. But then we've had a massive issue with dropout. The first thing was just connecting the monitors. Engaging with schools' Wi-Fi, and every single school had a different setup. It was set up by some technician or teacher's son who was a technician 10 years ago and has just been left in place. Since then, some of them had the opposite problem where that control had been taken outside of the school and was managed on like a academy or council level, and they just couldn't access it. So the dropout from that was really quite significant. We spent a lot of the project time in the end in that. On the device, we had, well, it updates every minute, so it was quite a significant amount of data. That was a technical challenge tackled by Imperial, actually, that took on that. On the device, we had some small display and a kind feedback of the RGB LEDs on there. We were collecting CO2, particulate matter, TVOCs. TVOCs was a bit of a funny one that no one could really define a metric for that, but and temperature and humidity. And lastly, the one thing that came out of our core design sessions is this thing needed to be silent. It could not beep in the middle of a teaching session and say, you must open your windows, that kind of thing. So what I wanted to make this workshop about is, rather than me saying, pitching for an hour saying what we did, I'd like to pose the challenge that we had to all of you, and then you could do it, and then I'll tell you what we did afterwards. So what I really want to do is by the end of the session, keep sort of telling myself, why didn't we think of that? Or maybe we should do that next time, or maybe there's some kind of shared knowledge in that debate. Just for accessibility, because I kind of hope to use Miro, but if we're a small enough group, we'll see what works best. It's a fantastic tool for collaborating. We were a team that were in our small team spread across the country, but then we had other institutions and everyone kind of engaged in the Miro board, and that's been a really good collaboration tool for both during meetings and offline in parallel. But sorry, so the point I was going to make is that it's not always the most accessible. It doesn't work brilliantly with screen readers, so there is a PDF copy if needed. So I'm going to introduce a few tasks that we can try and take on. They're meant to be quite quick fire, just to kind of spin up, try and build up a few ideas and discussions, and then then I'll go through what we did. So the first one is we started this project and we had us as the software team and the researchers engaged. We didn't have any skills yet. So your challenge is to basically, the output is a splash page. What's on the front of your website? How do you attract teachers that have really, really tiny amounts of time into the project and where they need to go? And also, how do you communicate with them, keep them kind of engaged when they're not necessarily engaging with technology as much as us? They might not be looking at their emails every day. They kind of might not have used Zoom, or they might not have used like different technology for communicating. So has everyone got access to the Miro? Right.
It's telling me to sign up to.
Oh, sorry. So there should be a password, but let me just get that. I don't think you need to sign up.
No, I think I need to make a Miro account or something.
So the password will be CW24 SAMHE. That not super. That into the slide again. Let me know if it's like. That's in the random channel Slack. I did check in incognito mode that you should be able to go into that and enter the password without an account, but is it still asking you for an account?
All right, I'll try that. Yeah. Yeah, it wants me to give it my email address and stuff. Sorry. I don't want to. Oh my God. And make an account, another account to another thing.
I think because we're a small group, we could probably just have someone that facilitates note keeping on there. Right. It was more of a thing if there was multiple groups, then it lets us have a second place for that information. Do you want to work? Do you want to work as a everyone works in one group, we just move the tables together.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Hugo, if you're still there, what might be easiest if perhaps we just extend this table in the middle and work around the hour.
I just wish that.
Did you say before that you were, as the dev team, needing to help connect the devices to Wi-Fi?
So we spent a lot of time first writing the documentation.
Yeah.
And then realizing that nobody had time to read the documentation. And then we've looked at different solutions like for one set of skills, we're working with the council who then go out and help connect. I actually have GB best dongle that connects it instead.
And so then this first step here, you're saying about gathering schools, was that part of what you do as a dev team?
It was a collaboration. So we had at York, we had the citizen science team, and it was their kind of job to get the schools engaged. But we're also based in the York team, so we kind of worked together to say, how do you need, because we had a comms expert as well that came in, and we worked as a team to say, what does the website need to do? How do we need to link that with what's on the social media? How do we need to link that with what we're sending out to be emailed in newsletters and things like that?
Oh, shit. You on Zoom? No. No, I didn't have to get in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I think everyone must be at the party.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people at the party.
Yeah,
There's cake then.
yeah.
Well, sure, I need more cake, so. No, quite.
I think it's
Could you put, sorry, Sam, could you put there's a collaborative notes document, could you put that link, I just sent it to you in the Zoom chat?
Yes. That probably is my passport.
I'm not really sure what you want us to be doing.
I mean, the idea is that, like, what would you do if you needed to get thousands of skills? I chat with this.
I would delegate that and say it's not a software engineer's job.
But I guess as a software on our team, some expertise was in web dev, so styling and stuff like that. And we did end up bringing in both a graphic designer to do what you can see is the icons that are on there, but then also there's actually a magazine graphic designer editor who then sort of styled and designed the website to look more professional. So it was kind of like a multifaceted collaboration of these different expertise to try and our expertise, I think a lot of what we contributed in addition to building the app was things around accessibility and web development accessibility and things like that, and making sure that all of that went into that discussion.
I think it has to be a conversation that can't be like the technical people have to understand the remit in order to develop what's needed, but that has to be a conversation between the schools. I guess what I would do is I would find a really, really friendly teacher and a really friendly school who wouldn't mind trialing different options and pay them in chocolate, possibly wine, and see if they could see what their barriers were around what they understood, what they didn't understand, where they were spending time. So you can kind of co-produce essentially. But it's easier said than done because it takes time.
I think also as well from where it has teachers and as stakeholders, I think that it's getting the buy-in from people you don't know.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy, so it's
having to build networks that can lend credibility, but also the co-production aspect of like, what do they get out of it? And actually, if you can say to a teacher, oh, well, it can tie in with X part of your curriculum this year, even if it's just a workshop and some idea generation and some resources on a webpage that will support
It
that.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think there's a real, my personal opinion, there seems to be this, there's researchers that specialize in citizen science and education, but there's very few people that really work at that interface where they can say, look, this is the curriculum link, this is the curriculum link. And so you can, often sometimes schools materials developed by researchers, absolutely no idea what level the kids are at, what's useful for them to, whereas a teacher looks at it and says, that's plotting a graph that fits in with this key learning outcome. And but I've worked a little in this space and I've not found many people that work in that in between area. But I think it's much needed.
I think something that was common throughout the project was just accepting that regardless of what our role was, it was vital that we had lots of experiences feeding in, and everyone had a kind of perspective of a way that you could improve the project regardless if that was their expertise, just because we've all been at school, we've all kind of gone through that. A lot of us had kids as well, so there was lots of angles that went into that discussion.
So what schools were you targeting? Was it everything? Was it primary, secondary, specialist, public, private, state?
Countryside.
It needed to be everything. It needed to be right across from age range and right across the country, different depravity levels and things like that. We did a bit of a kind of analysis on how we'd hit that diversity at one point, and slightly randomly, we'd actually done quite well. For the first few skills, that then started to get a bit too dominated by the kind of the private schools where they had more time with more resources. So when we had that dropout, that was the issue. It had schools that were really tight for time and tight for budget and things that dropped out for us.
So here's an idea, you could do a social media search for hashtag Clean Air Day and see which schools and see which schools had, because I know my kid's school does a lot of like kind of, it's Clean Air Day, walk to school, we'll put your photos on Twitter, and you could see like what kind of schools were interested in that kind of thing in the first place. That might be quite a good sort of first step to.
That's a thing. Hashtag Clean Air Day.
And it's in June, it's a hashtag Clean Air Day, yeah.
As of, when did that first come up?
No idea. But it's the thing.
I'm sure we've had about 10 of them in the last
There's been quite a few,
Same hashtag. Just
I mean, it's hilarious because in our school, you get pictures of all the kids walking up this horrendously polluted road because it's one of the main roads in Edinburgh, and you've got the kids walking to school and skipping to school on Clean Air Day, showing that they're using active travel. In the background, you've got all these buses and lorries and so it's slightly, but yeah.
I guess the other option is things like, I'm a scientist, get me out of here, talking to them and see what schools are, obviously they can't share it, but if you get on their mailing list. Because those are schools that are already actively engaged with researchers.
I'm always surprised that there's not, just from speaking to teachers, there doesn't seem to be that much sharing of resources between schools. Like teachers tend to, what experience I've seen, tend to kind of develop their own lessons fairly independently of each other, and there's a real kind of preference and style as to how they deliver. So my first thought would be find a network of teachers that are interested in STEM kind of things and apply through that. And I didn't know, there are Facebook groups and networks and things like that, but I was surprised how little sharing of resources there was, which seems to me, but I think maybe it takes as long to interpret someone else's resources as it does to just write your own. Like, if you take on someone else's lecture notes, after a point, you may as well just write your own. But I guess networks like that. But it'd be nice to make sure you're not just targeting schools that are already doing stuff, like to kind of reach to.
A lot of it is just I'm sorry,
Oh, you go.
it's just the network reach.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I used to do a lot of work with the Rural Society, and at times I'd go back to my mother, who's a teacher in South Wales, and she's like, yeah, no one's come, no one's sent anything out.
Oh, yeah.
And she does loads now with the people that I introduced her to, but it, you know, that's just one example, but I also used to do a lot of outreach in Devon and Cornwall, and it's just, teachers are very time poor.
Yes.
And the ways of communicating with them, and like you said, making sure that their contribution is minimal, but also meaningful is very difficult.
Mm. Did you look videos and things like that? Like, you know, this is how you plug it in, this is how you set it up and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Did
by
you-
the end of it, we went through everything.
Yeah. TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good point for me just to
Yeah.
see if I can reveal this.
Ooh.
So this was our homepage. We went through a lot of iterations of this. It got quite frustrating as a developer to be constantly changing text on things. And throughout the project, every single block of text has been designed by committee. Like it has gone through hundreds of comments on Google Documents. It's then gone live, and then everyone's had a change of heart and it's gone through lots more comments. And I think it's paid off for what's ended up in there in terms of how concise it is and the way it's presented. But I guess just to pick up a few things on there that it's just standard kind of UI stuff really on trying to pick out the things that are important. So we wanted people to register, that was the most important thing. But also the people we found that people were getting the monitor and then going to the site and not being quite sure what to do next. It kind of seems obvious when you're using apps a lot, but for someone that was kind of new to it, it wasn't necessarily. So we had the big green sticker as this is eye-catching kind of thing to help it in the right direction. The headers were another thing that went through many iterations of how do you summarize everything that we're trying to say into 4 key kind of groupings that were clear. Things like just the wording of, is it help center, is it support, is it technical support, what is it that actually means something to the people that are using it?
Do you know what I'm surprised you don't have? Is I would have put, have you got your free monitor?
We thought about that. I think that went through a few discussions about whether it should be.
Those meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember what the exact reasons for not wanting to do that, but I think it was around not wanting it to be a case of people grabbing a monitor because it was free,
Yeah,
but
I can
not
see.
being engaged.
Yeah,
So
you need to be interested enough to read through.
yeah,
or-
exactly.
Yeah.
Was it just one monitor per school, or did you send out multiple monitors to schools that?
So it was for the first stage. We're now going into a kind of second stage where we've got a council on board who are engaging with a small section of schools who will then get sort of 20 odd monitors in
Right.
industry.
That's what I want. If you contact the council.
Yeah, so but then, I mean, we've got a council involved who it all seemed great until they tried to engage schools and just had the same problems that we did. But even though they had that kind of authority, it didn't mean the schools had any more time.
But like the council can give you more information regarding which school is having these resources, which one is not having these resources.
Yeah,
Yeah, one, and secondly, is that engagement of the council, you can try to be biased. In which, let's say, for example, you restrict yourself to Coventry Council, not talking to Warwick. So maybe they be having conflict in between them.
For
or this
sure.
kind of thing, so. Which, because you engage Coventry Council, this one would say, no, I'm not going. So I'm not going to be bad. So you would have to try to like be political and systematic in doing that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes, do you aim to get, do you aim to get multiple monitors in the same school, or can one classroom sign up independently of the rest of the school? Like, how did you manage that? Did you get that?
So that was another technical challenge. So there are databases with unique IDs for schools. So we had to pull that in. And when you fill in the registration form, you then have to pick the school from there. We then did some kind of checking afterwards to make sure that that school hadn't already been registered. And if they had, we said someone in your school had already registered. So it wasn't one monitor per school, but that kind of reason really. A lot of the schools had like an eco after school club, and that's where that engagement came from. So rather than it necessarily being something that was used in a lesson, schools do have a requirement to have a data logger. So for those schools that became engaged, I think that's what that resource ended up being, was their data logger, so that they had that data just for kids to basically play with spreadsheets and plotting and all that kind of thing.
So I'm just really curious about this. So was part of the condition that it stay in the same classroom then, or in the same position in the classroom? Like, how do you account for that variability? Like, oh, we'll put it here, but actually we're going to move it out of the way because we've noticed that he keeps knocking something that's kicking it. Like, how did that work?
So that was another it was another massive challenge, and it was both a technical and a very people challenge, very much a kind of almost a psychology of trying to convince people to put it in one place and not move it. So initially we said, don't move it. For those schools that just have one monitor, we've then tried to convince them to leave it in a certain amount of time. And then one of our activities they can do is the move your monitor activity. And in the same way that we get contextual data elsewhere, that's where we get the contextual data that says they've moved it. So that if there's a step change in the data, we could try and tie those two things together. I'll just zip through these, I guess, but we went everywhere. We had kind of the more large scale stuff of hitting social media. We did have the Department of Education, were one of the original funders, so they sent out messages to their mailing lists. We had teacher newsletters. We had like our own. Everyone on the team was sort of spread across the UK, so we sent out messages to the schools that were near us. It really became a bit of everyone chipping in to try and get schools. And this was trying to keep track, and I kind of wish we'd done a lot more of this in terms of kind of collecting that data of how we've used, where people have gone in the sort of public facing app and how they've used the app. We used it a little bit, and it highlighted some of the successful pushes. So this spike at the start, I think, was when the Department for Education sent out a message on their mailing lists, and then we got this quite significant spike.
Is that 2023 there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, is this just English schools, or is it Scottish and Welsh schools as well?
Scottish, Welsh, and Irish.
Oh.
Ireland, very difficult to break into.
I can imagine.
But I think we have managed to. I think that second spike was when we kind of, so to give a bit of background, how we started the project in terms of engagement is we managed to get 10 schools that we defined as the co-design schools. And those were the most engaged that we then brought into Zoom sessions. We had kind of offline, try to think of the name of the app that we use, but we use like a discussion app to get them engaged. And so we did a few weeks of that, and then went into what we called the pioneer phase. So that was expanding from 10 to 100. And that was a more offline discussion process and feedback. And then once we'd kind of gone to that, we went through a few development cycles, iterating on the app, and then did a big push, which you can see here, which was April last year. And then we got that big spike of registrations.
We're in telly as well, you know?
We were, yes.
My kids told me about it.
Yeah.
Kids know I like their calls. It's a very niche world.
Well, indeed.
I gotta say, I'm still a bit confused about the sort of division of labor and responsibilities here and the way the whole thing, because you said there was this three-body problem.
Yeah.
Where you've got the research team, dev team, and the schools.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's part we're talking about is before the schools were even involved, really.
Yeah.
But this idea of like, does that coming up with strategies of how to engage schools and sort of how to, yeah, all of that like marketing side of things, I guess, seems like that should be the research group problem because it's their research project. So I'm sort of a bit confused about why this sort of project management stuff is being done by the dev team.
I guess it was because the researchers were we had the air quality researchers and then the
Yeah.
citizen science researchers included the comms team and included us.
Right,
Um,
okay,
so I guess it was that our expertise as software developers were also in the kind of web development side of things.
Mhm.
And that kind of fitted in. I don't know if there was ever really a designation of
yeah,
whose responsibility all that was. It was just
yeah, yeah,
whoever kind of pitch in. It was our team in York's responsibility to get skills.
okay,
And whoever was involved
yeah, yeah,
in and had an idea of how to do that
Yeah.
was kind of open to pitch that really.
yeah, interesting. It just seems very unusual for, as like a task for RSEs to me.
I think because,
Yeah,
yeah, it's very far from HPC
yeah,
territory or like building the back end and things like that. It was
Yeah,
much
yeah.
more about that RSE as a, because my background is a lot more in building web apps, but in kind of working with users and working with like,
right.
like not so much the psychology, but the kind of some like complexity around how you engage software with people and things like that.
Yeah, I guess because I'm not a front end engineer at all. I would kind of assume that within website development, it's still you have a division between the people that are just coding up what the website does and the people who are designing what should be on the website, like graphic designers and marketers and that sort of thing do that, and then you just implement what they tell you to do as a front end. That's always been my assumption, but I guess not. You're saying you're doing a bit more of the
I guess for
design work.
So for the first iteration, we did the design work. And
Yeah.
we probably hit that issue that was a stretch for us to achieve the quality.
Yeah.
So the first iteration wasn't what you see there.
Yeah,
And then we kind of realized that to reach that level of professionalism, that's when we started to bring in like people with like brand identity expertise as external contractors. And then we worked with them, but they didn't have because it was so hard to get someone at such short notice, they were actually someone that designed magazine kind of layouts and things. So they kind of had that eye for getting information onto a page and it being kind of punchy and eye-catching and stuff, but they didn't necessarily know things like, well, what happens if your computer screen does this?
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So trying to bring that technical stuff, we always had to be involved in the conversation, otherwise they would go away and they come up with a design that didn't really work in our in practice.
Yeah, interesting.
I think, sorry, I didn't interrupt, like, anything with co-design and co-production, stuff like that is such a long and circular process that it's very hard, because you don't, if a co-design to be genuine, you must genuinely not know what the end product's going to be. It's not like you've got an idea and you're letting people say stuff and picking like color schemes or something like that. It has to be genuinely open, and so that has to be iterative. But yeah, it's time consuming.
One of the biggest difficulties of the project really was that we'd never really understood, not kind of realized the length of time that the development process would take. So that co-design bit had been blocked out as being like 3 months where we engaged with schools, and all that funding was spent on 3 months. And we barely even started building the app by the end of that. We'd been working on kind of outlines and sketches and things like that. And then we've had so many questions that I just wish we'd been able to just talk to a school. Just for 5 minutes, it would have saved hours and hours and hours of researchers' arguments over Zoom calls. But because of like funding and availability, that had already been spent and used.
So you need a pet school.
So
You need a very friendly school.
yeah.
Yeah.
But even for the co-design sessions, we would invite the 10 schools and get 2 of them to turn up. It was difficult. So the next challenge, I mean, I'm happy for us to just continue discussing things, but the next challenge for us was trying to organize all that kind of collective knowledge and learning from the co-design sessions, and the kind of challenge that we had, and try and arrange that into, well, we basically use the user story framework. And is anyone here who hasn't heard of user stories? So everyone's kind of,
Not really.
so it was a framework, I guess, where I picked it up from is a guy called Jeff Patton, I think. I don't know if anyone, I'm set, but Jeff Patton, I think it's Patton. I will double check that and try and get a link. But the idea is that you try and describe, it's like kind of storytelling approach. You describe, well, someone comes to our app, what do they do? What do they want to, I want to go on my app and I want to see my data.
Yeah.
What's the first thing I need to do? I need to go in there, I need to log in. Do I need to see my data straight away, or do I need to see the information, and just kind of go through really break down those steps. But we did that for all the different users. So we had, in addition to the pupils that would use it, the teachers will be using it in a different way. But then also the researchers wanted to ensure that the outputs that they wanted were in there. So their output might be that we want to know when someone's opened the window. So we had to look at what's the user story for a pupil using the app that leads them to then say, and the window has been open. Is it worth, I mean, do we want to go through the process of doing that, or would you rather I just said what we did and we kind of, was that?
So based off,
Yeah.
What else is?
based off that one sentence on each of those things, you mapped out something that we're saying.
Kind of, yeah. I'll show what we did, that's probably easier for us. So we ended up with this, which was basically, because the challenge at the start of the project, like I said, is we had this really defined amount of time with the schools where we could actually have feedback and discussions with them on what we were doing. Because we had so many different research groups involved, it was really difficult to, everyone was like shouting louder, oh, we want this information out of the app, or we want this. And then in parallel to the researchers' requirements, we wanted to make sure that the schools get and pupils get something out of it. So there was masses of things of possible features, possible uses, ways of kind of engaging with it. And we had to try and get a slice of that in quite a short amount of time. So we created like a user story. So we had things like, we went through a process of, we wanted the features that we created to answer a question. So the first question was, can someone see their data, or can someone get to their data? So then we discussed the features that we needed to implement for that to happen. So that was things like, they needed to be able to log in. They needed to be able to link to the monitor. They needed to be able to, the monitor needed to have connected. So all that documentation stuff needed to be there. The second one was things like, yeah, they need to be able to tell us that they've opened a window. So just kind of go through those steps.
So are you asking the teachers to log when they open the window during the day?
I'll get onto that in the next bit of how we tackle that.
I imagine that was popular.
I mean, what we wanted to happen was for teachers to have a light touch, because they were the ones with the time. We wanted it to be the pupils driving it, so that they had access to get in and do activities.
So that's why there was that requirement at the start for the first task about saying it needs pupil must appeal to both primary and secondary pupils. Yeah, so it's, I assumed that you were targeting like school principals or something to get them on board.
I think we ended up targeting everyone, and each school had a different level that was like interested.
Ended up being the person interested. Yeah.
So to come up with the requirement, did you interview stakeholders, or how did you come up with the requirement?
Yeah, so we had basically Zoom sessions with schools that were engaged. We had 10 schools to start with. And in those, we basically pitched, this is what we think we're going to try and do. And then they would feedback. And we had a few where it was just teachers, but we also had some where a teacher would have their class there. And like we had this kind of these interesting Zoom sessions where you're trying to kind of talk to an entire class of kids and translate all that quite complicated quality information and app information and develop and everything to them to try and get something out from them of what was interesting. One of the things that came out of it was that they didn't want it to be they didn't want it to be like superhero-y or overly kiddie or that kind of thing, which is a little bit of a direction we'd started to look at, kind of over characterizing it all and things like that. They wanted it to be a bit professional actually and feel like they're engaging with something a bit more.
Just that, you know, we've got less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Workshop section.
That's okay. I thought we might. It was tried to get the engagement. Anyway, so we went through that. Then we went through development cycles, and then eventually we translated all of that to GitHub projects. We tried Trello. It was just messy, but by going to GitHub projects, we actually managed to get. It was initially just the development team and one researcher, and then we basically showed them the value that we were getting out of it, and we managed to get the entire research team onto that, and that was a massive boost for productivity and transparency, of course. Would you rather we just had a discussion, or do you want me to just go through what we did for the other things and?
We're then about what you've done, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So then the next thing was, engaging pupils. One thing that came out of the user stories was that regardless of how much the researchers shouted, the project was a flop if we didn't have engaged pupils. So that was the driving force for everything, and the data we got out just became secondary to that. So to kind of achieve that engagement, we went into a sort of, we had these, we basically split the app into 3 sections. So there was the data, and that was lots of little database widgets. We had a researcher that came in and researched about actually what do kids know, because when you first go into this, you think, oh, I do a line plot with all the things on there, and then you realize that for half of primary, they've never even seen a table before.
I was just about to say, saw the chart at the bottom there.
Yeah.
And I was like, surely only like math students in the final year are going to be able to get anything out of that. Like, it's a lot.
So we put together, or one of my colleagues put together, like, this was the set of visuals that were good for this age group and the next age group. But by kind of having them all accessible, it meant that it pushed those that perhaps wanted to see something more complicated.
All right, that one says role school admin, so I'm guessing that is targeted at not a pupil, but a.
Oh yeah, that's the role that I was logged in at the time.
Oh yeah,
which it does show everything. For the database, everyone should see everything. We have looked at filters and things, but for the time being,
that's cool.
So that was the database side. Then we had the activities, and these were little bite-sized activities where you basically get a little. This was another thing that went through a lot of iterations, was about how each activity has a lot of meta information associated with it. And both the teachers and the pupils wanted to very quickly work out which of these activities were relevant to them. And there was lots of things that could be in there about whether is it an activity for one person or multiple people. Are you a group of people, or are you just logging in as yourself? Is it an activity that has videos or kind of engagement stuff? Is it quiz? So there was a lot of like metadata around each of these that we need to kind of represent as iconography and in a way that was not overwhelming when you're trying to read it. So that went through a lot of iterations. But then we settled on this kind of simple activity formats with I haven't taken the screenshot of the other, but I'll show the actual maybe it's where it was just step-based, and each step had a particular type associated with it. Some steps were quiz steps, some steps were showing the data and asking you a question around it. But to get that kind of metadata, pupils could complete these activities at any point. Obviously, that doesn't mean we pick up on every single time they've opened a window. But what we can do is tell them to, the start of the activity will be saying, look at what your data is like now. Go and open a window, sit down for 5 minutes, close the window, look back at the activity. So even though we haven't got all the iterations of the window open, we've got a block of data that says this is what happens to the air. And then we can kind of use more advanced methods to look at when else we think they may have opened the window and that kind of thing. So it wasn't about trying to kind of map every single event, it was just getting enough that we could start to link things to particular patterns.
So it should ask you the password,
Sorry,
your neural password.
yes, what did I set that as? CW24 and SAMHE. What's next? I think I'll just briefly go into this because I think I've covered it before, but the technology hurdle of how to disseminate the information of connecting the monitor and using the app, and we ended up with quite a massive FAQ that we've then kind of built in like searchability and things like that. That was another thing that went through a lot of iterations of how you phrased everything. And finally, scaling up and kind of future proofing. So from a technical point of view, we built these activities to be very component based. So each of those steps that you saw was a component on its own, and that was driven by metadata for that component. So we would say, this is the description of the component, this is the data it should be showing. And by doing that, it meant we could kind of put together new activities just by reconfiguring each of those components. And that was then, so each activity had like a JSON file associated with it that we then stored on a server so that we could then link the submitted data with the activity's JSON at that time. And then reconfigure it. That was great, but that meant that researchers initially had to tell us what they wanted in it, and we had to then edit a JSON file, and then these things became massive and unwieldy. So in the end, we ended up building what was essentially just a form that backends onto the JSON and gives them a preview of what they're going to see. And that meant quite a significant step change of how many activities we could build and how much engagement from the researchers as well. So that opened it up to all of the researchers from all of the different disciplines to engage in building activities. What time did we finish?
Now,
In 1 minute.
So shall I log into the app? So you should be able to get to samhe.org.uk/app. And then if you click register. No, sorry, web app, and then register a new user. Make sure you register. And then click on, make sure you're on the student tab at the top. The school handle is SAMHE Demo School 1.
Do we need to go to, do we go to log in or do we go to register?
I can go back page. So you should be on this page here. Is that?
Oh, yeah, no, that's.
and then
Okay.
register a new user.
Register.
Register new user, yep. Then student. And then SAMHE Demo School 1. Then the secret word is SAMHE Demo School 1 pupil. This is the live site, so I had to make sure that what I did wasn't the same as another school, otherwise that would
Yeah.
confusing. And then just give yourself a random username. Make sure you remember that because it asks you to log in afterwards. Don't tick the last one. Apparently for anything that involves pupils, you have to make sure there's a tick box that checks that they've actually read what they're doing. So you have to have a tick box that they don't tick.
Yeah, right.
Then it'll ask you to log in.
Cool.
Good.
You've seen the one at the end.
So what's the back end for the website, like for all of the the user management and all that sort of stuff?
So the client that you're seeing is built with React, and that's hosted, and then the back end for that is C#.net.
Okay.
And we had an external contractor who, that was his expertise, so
Yeah.
he kind of built that, but with our, he kind of led that, and then we contribute to that when we can. The data for the contextual data, so like the activities that completed and things like that, is all SQL.
Yeah.
And then we link back to what's the name of it now? Not Neo4j, that's the other one. It'll come to me, I'll find it. It's a time-based database essentially that then.
Oh, the one that we put together.
The one that you put together, yeah. Yeah,
I say we, I mean, I
Chris.
reviewed like 2 PRs.
Yeah. I think it was set
Yeah.
up, but it just worked, so.
I think it's, was it just like time-based TV or something? Time scale? Can't remember.
Influx DB. Influx DB. that was-
Yes. Yeah, and that's what actually connected to the devices.
So we went through as you'd expect, a tendering process for the actual monitors themselves.
Yeah.
And throughout this, it was Air Gradient as the manufacturer, and we've had the kind of, I guess the head of Air Gradient has been engaged with the project from the start and really kind of involved in that process. They've gone through a lot of iterations of the monitor and the way it connects to the Wi-Fi. They kind of try to help us with that.
Yeah.
And kind of having them involved was really quite critical at the start. But they essentially they have their own web interface for their data because it's just a general air quality monitor. But then we pull every second from their database and sort on our Influx database so that we have our copy of it essentially.
Mhm.
On the long-term longevity of that data.
And so then the connection between those, what you were saying was like the JSON form of like that activities. That would be like metadata about what was being read by the devices. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if I've got
Which monitor letter would be?
A or C. So A is currently in my office at home. C is this one here. Yeah, like that. C there'll be a few more gaps in C because it's been on and off, whereas A is
Yeah.
It's very neat, and it's really cool project. So. There's been quite a lot of attempts to do something similar, so it's nice to see something so big as the coordinated and with the nice interface and things. It's tricky.
what I've been in a kind of with a software developer legacy hat on. I've been trying to think, well, we put all this effort into 2 things. One is the building up of the network of schools. So we've now got schools that we know are engaged. The other is just the building of the web app in itself. That's been a lot of effort and a lot of, we've tried to build it in a way that is fairly adaptable to many uses. So I'm trying to now have conversations with, we've got the National STEM Centre in York. So we're trying to have conversations with them and a few other institutions on like how else can we use this app? How can we've got an app that effectively presents data, activities related data.
Yeah.
There are many applications for that within the education kind of sector.
What are you going to do for monitors? Do the schools get to keep them forever?
Yeah, I think it's more effort to get them back for people rather than just keep hopefully uploading information, uploading data. But we keep that. The project's going on till I think it's March next year. And then we stop supporting it, but it'll still sit there. We're stopping registrations in June, so if you have any skills that you think would be interested, please get them involved. And
So while there's obviously like UK air quality is super important, but there's a huge lack of air quality information throughout the global site. So we did have some spare monitors. It would make for a really nice project to do them in schools, especially if you've got all the infrastructure. It's dodgy Wi-Fi, often dodgy Wi-Fi, dodgy power, but
So that's what.
Those are one fine, our school and
there's obviously universally throughout the global south, but I mean, obviously that's one of the challenges, but it's, you know, there's just a huge data gap.
That was our solution to schools that were engaged, but we just couldn't get the Wi-Fi monitors involved. If we just started saying, we had budget because we
7 minutes ago.
we just had budget, but
What, 500?
what we didn't want to do was do that from the start, because that was, it was the administrative overhead of the contracts for the SIM cards that were involved,
I know.
and who was responsible for keeping up with that.
Mhm.
But that was a solution that did bring in more schools. And
Yes, yeah.
Why don't they just?
I mean,
You don't want to be missing out on all that data after all that for, yeah.
It's really interesting. What advice and
Cool, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I don't know, Hugo, did you have any, sorry.
So thanks very much, but it's a few minutes ago.
Interesting to track. I think in schools as well, like.
By the way,
This is actually quite big.
What are those?